The grease smoke never left you. That was the thing nobody told you about working a short order line on a deep space way station. The smell got into the lining of your lungs and it stayed there. A permanent perfume of charred protein slabs, and whatever passed for cooking oil in the outer sectors. Cale Draven had been breathing it for 3 years. He'd stopped tasting his own food after the first 6 months. He worked the line alone most nights. Suited him. The way station Kareth 9 was not the kind of place that attracted good company. It sat at the junction of 4 trade corridors in the Valan Expanse, which meant it attracted every species that had ships and money, and somewhere to be that wasn't here. Miners, smugglers, arena scouts sometimes, though they mostly kept to the upper decks where the lighting was better and clientele wore fewer scars. Cale was human. On Kareth 9, that was a category with roughly the same social standing as being a defective appliance. He was 6'2", and lean in the way that people get lean when they don't eat enough of their own cooking, with hands that had learned to be careful. Careful pouring, careful measuring, careful not to touch the wrong edge of a pan. He had a jaw that looked like it had been used as a reference surface for something flat, and eyes so dark they caught light and held it the way a gravity well holds light. His mother had called them his best feature. His mother had been an optimist. The Thurvik came in at the end of a double shift. There were 4 of them, barrel-chested, methane breathers in partial atmosuits, the kind that let the face show so they could eat, but kept the chest-gill apparatus sealed. They smelled like ammonia and overconfidence. They took the back 4 seats and started talking loudly in their own language, a sequence of clicks and guttural pops that the translation matrix rendered as something between a legal argument and a mating display. Cale served them without comment. He set down their trays and turned back to the line. The big one, the one the others deferred to, reached out and caught his wrist. The grip was designed to impress. Thurvik skeleton structure ran to dense bone with calcium silicate reinforcement. Their grip strength had been measured at roughly 4 times human maximum. The big one held Cale's wrist and looked at him with the flat, pigmentless eyes that Thurvak used to express dominance, and said something that the Matrix rendered as, "Human. Still alive, I see. Forgot to tell you." Cale looked at the grip on his wrist. He looked at the Thurvak. He said quietly, "Let go." The Thurvik said something that got rendered as laughter. What happened next was not what any of them expected. Cale had grown up in a habitat station on the edge of the Meridian Belt, where the power cycled twice a day, and you learned to settle disputes with your body, because you couldn't afford to break anything electronic. He had 3 years of low-gravity adaptation behind him, which meant his reaction speed was slightly better than a dirt-side human's. He had hands that were careful, and he had the complete, unsentimentalized understanding that he was about to be made an example of, which meant he needed to move first. He broke the grip, not by pulling, but by rotating hard into the thumb joint, which is the vulnerable axis on a Thurvak hand, the same as it is on a human hand, and then he hit the big one across the face with the flat of his palm, open-handed, the way you slap something you're trying to stop, not hurt. The Thurvak went backward off the stool. The stool cracked against the next one. The other 3 rose. The fight lasted 40 seconds. The diner sustained moderate structural damage. When it was over, Cale was standing and the Thurvik were not. He looked at his hands. His knuckles were bleeding, where the face ridge of one of them had opened the skin. He wiped his hands on his apron and started picking up the stools. His boss fired him before the Thurvak had been helped off the floor. The woman found him in the corridor outside, sitting against the wall, with his back straight and his elbows on his knees, looking at nothing in particular. She was tall. Not human tall, but tall, in the manner of someone who had learned to take up space and decided to keep doing it. She wore a gray coat with the collar up, and she looked at him the way you look at something you're trying to price. "That was the stupidest thing I've seen on this level in 6 months," she said. "And last week a Brenthian tried to eat a power coupling." "I'll take the compliment," Cale said. It wasn't one. She crouched down to his eye level, which he respected. "Thurvak's skeletal density. You should have 3 broken fingers." "I know their joint structure." "How?" "I've been working this station 3 years. I pay attention." He looked at her. "You were watching. I'm always watching." She held out a hand, not to help him up, just a flat offer of introduction. Mira Voss, I manage combat contracts. The arena on level 6. You've heard of it. Everyone had heard of it. The Karath 9 Arena was not the largest fighting venue in the expanse, but it was the oldest, which meant it had legitimacy that money couldn't buy. Species from 47 systems competed. The fights were equalized. The way station's handicap technology read the physiological parameters of each fighter and applied compensatory neural damping and strength-limiting fields, so that every match was, in theory, test of skill and will rather than biology in theory. I've heard of it, Kale said. Humans haven't competed in 53 years, she said. The last one quit after the third fight. Before that, the one before him lasted a season. We were considered too fragile. Wrong biology for the sport. Were we? That's what the data said. She looked at his hands. The data might be outdated, he said no. He said it clearly, and without hesitation, which was the right answer and also the wrong one, because saying it meant he'd thought about it, and thinking about it meant there was something to think about. He said no because he had a plan. The station long enough to save the fare back to the inner systems. Find work that didn't smell like grease smoke. Find something that looked like a life. He'd been saying this for 3 years. He said no and walked back to his quarters, where a converted storage bay on sub-level 2 that he had made habitable through a combination of salvaged insulation and the particular stubbornness of someone who had nowhere better to be. Oral was there when he arrived. Oral was his oldest friend, which was not saying much because Kale wasn't someone who accumulated friends easily. Oral was a small man, small by human standards, quick, barely coming to Kale's shoulder, with quick eyes and the permanent expression of someone doing arithmetic in their head. He had been on Karath 9 for longer than Kale, which had given him an encyclopedic knowledge of every back channel, back room, back depth on the station. He was sitting on the floor with his hands bound. There were 2 of Roger's people in the room with him, neither of them species Kale recognized on sight. One of them was larger than anything that should be able to stand upright inside a standard station corridor. The other one was smaller and meaner looking, which is a combination that is always more dangerous. Kale, Oral said, and his voice was doing the thing it did when he was scared, which was to try to sound like he wasn't. I may have made a minor financial miscalculation. The smaller alien said in flat translated standard, your friend owes 1,200 in gaming debt to Roger's operation. You'll pay it back, or we'll get creative about how we settle the account. Kale looked at Oral. He looked at the 2 aliens. He thought about the fare back to the inner systems, which he did not have, and about the plan, which was clearly not a plan anymore. I'll pay it back. With what? The smaller one said. He went to Mira Voss the next morning. The arena smelled like adrenaline and old violence, which is to say, it smelled like copper and sweat, and the particular charged air quality of high-capacity power systems. The fighting floor was 20 meters across, a matte black surface, embedded with the sensor nets that fed the handicap system, and above it the lighting rigs hung like waiting judgment. KL stood on the edge of the floor and looked up at the empty tiers of seating and felt, for the first time in 3 years, something that wasn't resignation. Mira watched him look at it. The system reads you on entry, she said. Biometrics, bone density, muscle fiber composition, neural conduction speed, reaction coefficient. It calibrates the field to bring you to standard across all categories. Everyone's to the same baseline. In theory, you keep saying that. She was quiet for a moment. The system evens the biology. It doesn't even everything. He looked at her. What doesn't it even? Pain tolerance, she said. Adaptation speed. The way a fighter reads a room. The way humans, specifically, keep going after the biology says stop. She paused. System was designed to compensate for physical differentials. It wasn't designed for whatever it is your species does when it decides it isn't done yet. That sounds like an advantage. It sounds like a theory. I've been waiting 53 years to test it. His first fight was against something called a Vorath, which resembled a very large, very angry pile of muscle that had learned to walk. Kale had watched fight footage for a week before the match. Old footage, archived from before humans stopped competing, studying the way the equalized fighters moved, the weight shifts, the telegraphed commitments. He'd learned to cook by watching better cooks. Principle transferred. The Vorath hit like a compressed air piston. Even through the equalization field, each impact was a structural event. Kale took 3 of them in the opening 30 seconds, felt something wrong in his left side. Not broken, just angry, and then stopped trying to block and started trying to move. He didn't win by being strong. He won by being annoying. He circled. He made the Vorath commit to angles, and wasn't where the angle ended. He wore it down by existing, by being a problem that wouldn't resolve itself, until the Vorath's timing degraded, and it started hitting the air where Kale had been, and then Kale hit it precisely twice in the place where the equalization field data had told him the neural cluster was, and the Vorath went down. The arena crowd was quiet for a moment. Then it made a noise Kale's translation matrix couldn't categorize. Oral from the side of the floor said, "I think that's applause." He kept winning. He couldn't explain it any better than Mira could. Each fight was different, different species, different movement patterns, different strategies the equalization field applied in different ways to different bodies. And he was never the strongest, never the fastest, never the creature in the arena whose biology was most suited to this. But he watched everything. He filed it. He found the thing that was true about each opponent, and he used it. The way a cook uses the thing that's true about the ingredient. Work with the structure, not against it. Between fights he trained, which mostly meant running the maintenance corridors of Sublevel 2 until his lungs burned and then running more. Oral, it kept him company, complaining steadily about the absence of good food on the lower levels and occasionally saying something observationally precise that turned out to be useful. He had a way of noticing things that made no sense until they did. Rogor noticed after the 3rd fight. Rogor was the kind of being whose appearance had been designed, not by evolution but by deliberate cultivation, to suggest power. He ran the arena's criminal lair the way some people run a civic institution, with the confidence of someone who had never seriously considered the possibility that the institution might fail. He managed Horn, the current champion, a being who was less a fighter than a phenomenon, an alien whose species had been fighting things for 1,000,000 years and hadn't developed the idea of stopping. He found Kale in the corridor outside the fighter prep rooms and offered him a contract. More money, better facilities, a stable of fighters behind him. Kale said no. Rogor looked at him for a long moment with the expressionless quality of someone calculating, and then he said, "You understand what I'm offering. I understand exactly what you're offering," Kale said. No. He walked away, which was a thing that people, apparently, did not often do to Rogor. He could feel the calculation happening behind him. He didn't look back. That night, Oral said, "You know he's going to try to kill you. He's going to try to make me lose," Kale said. "Is different." Is it? Kale thought about it. Not very. The woman's name was Jade. She introduced herself at the bar on level 4. A place Kale went occasionally because it served something that approximated coffee, and he had a weakness for approximations. She sat down next to him with the ease of someone who had practiced sitting down next to people. And in the carefully assembled way that is always slightly more beautiful than accidental beauty, she started talking to him. He was not immune to her. He'd like to say he saw through it immediately, but that would be a lie. And Kale tried, when possible, to keep his accounting accurate. She was engaging. She knew things about the arena that a casual bystander wouldn't know. She asked good questions and listened to the answers. He left after one drink and went back to his quarters and lay awake for a while, looking at the ceiling, where the insulation he'd salvaged from a cargo bay had developed a pattern that resembled, depending on his mood, either a topographic map or a face. He thought about how Rogor worked. He thought about the ways you could damage someone without touching them. He thought about the coffee, and went to sleep. 3 fights later, he was in the championship bracket. The station's feeds were running his stats, which was surreal. Seeing your own biometric data processed through the arena's equalization tables and returned as a probability index. Humans, 0 championships in 53 years. Final odds standing at a number that was insulting if you thought about it. He didn't think about it. He thought about Horn. Horn was 2.5 meters of biological fact. His species, the Kethvar, had evolved on a high-gravity world where every living thing was also a weapon, and they were built accordingly, dense, multi-jointed, with a skeletal lattice that functioned as armor. Even through the full equalization field, Horn hit like a geological event. He'd fought 47 matches, and won all 47. His last 3 opponents had been removed from the arena floor in sections. Kale had watched every recorded fight. He'd watched them the way he'd once watched better cooks, not for the technique, for the habit. Horn had a habit. When his opponent hurt him, genuinely hurt him, not the routine impact he absorbed without changing, he took one step back. Just one. A small recalibration, the body's honest record of pain. One step back, it meant something. He wasn't sure what yet. He stored it. The night before the championship, he woke at 2 in the morning, with his hands shaking. It was a fine tremor, not enough to see from the outside, but enough to feel. A cellular-level notification that something was wrong. He sat up. The room tilted slightly. He sat very still and did the accounting. He hadn't eaten anything unusual. He hadn't drunk anything that Oral hadn't also drunk. He tried to remember the evening and found a gap, small but real, between sitting at the line near the fighter prep rooms and arriving back at his quarters. He'd been tired, he'd thought, he'd assumed tired. He went to the medical station. The medic on duty was a Selnari, a species known for 2 things, which were botanical expertise and a complete absence of patience for drama. The medic scanned him once, looked at the readout, and said, compound, metabolic suppressant. Mild dose. She looked at him over the scanner. Someone wanted you slow for tomorrow, not incapacitated. Just slightly less. How much less? 12 to 15% across cardiovascular and neural response. She was already reaching for a counteragent. Someone was careful. This would have been difficult to trace until post-fight. Can you fix it? I already have. He stood in the medical bay for a moment after she finished, looking at his hands, which had stopped shaking. He felt a steady, cold clarity settling in. Not anger. Anger was noise. This was something quieter. A door closing on everything that wasn't necessary. He went back to his quarters and slept 4 hours and woke up ready. The arena was full. He'd been in the arena before, for his own fights, obviously, and for others he'd watched from the stands. But he'd never seen it full. Every tier, every species. The noise was a physical thing, layered and non-human, and vast, and it settled on him as he walked through the fighter's tunnel and felt oddly like something approaching welcome. Oral was at the tunnel mouth. His small face was doing something complicated. He looked at Kale the way you look at someone you're scared for and trying not to show it, and he reached into his coat pocket and produced a small flask, the kind that should not technically have been in this part of the station. It's tea, Kale said, from the thing I traded for last month, the Velnathi stuff. Kale took it. He drank it. It was tea, or close enough, with the mineral aftertaste that meant it came from somewhere with a different water chemistry. He handed it back. I'll see you afterward, he said. Oral looked at him. You'd better. Horn was already on the floor. The thing about Horn in person, the thing footage didn't convey, was the stillness. He stood at his mark with the quality of something geological, a patience that was not calm but was rather the complete absence of urgency. Because urgency had never been a survival requirement. He looked at Kale the way a stone looks at weather. Not hostile, not interested, just unimpressed by the concept of opposition. Equalization field came online. Kale felt it, not pain, but kind of sensory realignment, the body's parameters being read and adjusted, field compensating for the differential between human and Kethvar physiology. He'd felt it before. He breathed through it. The announcer said something in 6 languages simultaneously, most of which were sounds Kale couldn't replicate with human vocal anatomy. Then the floor lights changed, and the fight began. Horn hit him first. He'd expected this. Horn always hit first. It was the opening data collection, a probe to read how the opponent handled initial impact. Kale took it on his shoulder and let it spin him, used the rotational energy, converted it, came out of the spin moving instead of falling. He heard the crowd do the thing it had started doing for him. That layered non-human sound that the Matrix still couldn't categorize. He moved. That was his strategy, such as it was, be somewhere. Be consistently somewhere, unpredictably somewhere, never the place that the Kethvar pattern recognition expected. Horn's species had evolved to fight things that hit back in kind. They had 50 million years of successful programming that told them how a fight went. Kale's assignment was to be something that the 50 million years hadn't accounted for. He was. Horn hit him 11 times in the first 2 minutes. Each time Kale was still there, hurt, recalibrating, adjusting, and each time Horn expected him not to be. Crowds in the tiers were making the uncategorizable sound. Kale filed it somewhere and kept moving. And then, 2 minutes, 40 seconds, he hurt Horn. He caught the Kethvar at the exact angle his footage study had identified. A gap in the skeletal lattice at the lower thorax where the density was thinner, and he hit it precisely once with everything he had behind it. He felt the impact travel all the way up his arm. Horn made a sound that his species didn't make in public, frequency below human hearing that Kale felt as a vibration in his chest. Horn took one step back. Kale saw it. He'd been waiting for it. Recalibration, the honest record of pain, and in the recalibration, Horn's pattern briefly dissolved. Not for long, half a second. Half a second is not nothing. Kale hit him 4 more times in that half second, each one precise, each one the result of a week of footage and 3 years of learning to be careful. The 4th one landed at the base of the Kethvar skull, at the junction point where the spinal column met the cortex cluster, and Horn's legs decided they were done. The arena was silent for the length of a full breath. Then the sound came. He found out later what Oral had done during the 2nd round. He hadn't known. He'd been occupied. But partway through the fight, Orel had gone looking for what he suspected was happening in the control room, above the floor. He'd spent 3 years building contacts on the station and knowing where the systems were and who ran them, and he'd gone up there and found 2 of Roger's people with their hands in the equalization hardware, and he had, with the tools available to a small man who wasn't a fighter but who knew where things were, resolved the situation. The resolution involved a conduit panel, a service junction, and what Oral described afterward as aggressive technical maintenance. "You took them out yourself," Kale said. "I'm more capable than I look," Oral said. "I know that. Most people don't." "Most people," Kale said, "aren't paying attention." Rogor was arrested at the docking level, trying to board a transport. He had the look of someone who had never seriously expected consequences. It is always the look of someone who is wrong. Kale stood in the tunnel after the crowd had thinned, the championship marker they'd given him in one hand, a simple thing, a disc, with something written on it in 6 languages, and he looked at the arena floor, which was now empty and lit only by the maintenance grid, the matte black surface, the embedded sensors, the 20 meters of floor where apparently 53 years of accumulated certainty about human limitations had been revised. Mira came and stood next to him. She was quiet for a while. "So," she said. "So," he said, "your debt is cleared. You have prize money. Enough for the fare back to the inner systems and more." She paused. "If that's what you want." He looked at the floor. He thought about the plan, the original plan, the one that had felt like a plan until it didn't. The inner systems. The life that looked like a life. He had a number in his head that he'd been protecting for 3 years, a distance he was maintaining between where he was and somewhere better. And he looked at the number and found it had changed without his permission. He thought about the flask of Elnathi tea at the tunnel mouth. The accountant's arithmetic of a small man who was more capable than he looked. The medic who had said, "I already have," like it was nothing. The training corridors on sublevel 2. The particular smell of a place where you'd worked hard enough that the smell got into you. He thought about what it felt like to walk into an empty arena and feel something that wasn't resignation. "They want to offer you a multi-season contract," Mira said. "I told them I'd ask." "I know, you don't have to." "I know," he said again. He looked at the championship disc. On the human side, they'd found the human translation. It said first, which was accurate as far as it went, though it didn't go very far. First in 53 years wasn't the same as first. But first in 53 years was something. It was a door open where a door had been assumed closed. He'd kicked in enough doors to know what that felt like. "Tell them yes," he said. 3 days later, KL was working the line again. Not because he had to, he had enough money now to not have to, but because the diner on Level 3 had reopened under new management, and the new manager was short a cook and had asked, And because Kale had found, to his mild surprise, that he missed the work, the precision of it, the careful hands, the way a good order felt when it came off the line right, he was making something that approximated eggs. A Terran nutritional base with amino acid supplements that the local protein sources couldn't provide. When Oral came in and sat at the counter and watched him cook with the expression of someone sitting in the front row of something they'd seen before and liked. There are 17 species on this station, Oral said. Who now believe humans are viable opponents in the arena? Good. There are also 6 that I've counted, who have registered formal objections with the Commissioner's office on the grounds that human psychology constitutes an unfair competitive advantage and should be compensated by the equalization field. Kale looked at him. My psychology needs to be equalized. Apparently, the argument is that the refusal to acknowledge physical limitation beyond a certain pain threshold is a biology-independent variable that the current field parameters don't account for. They want the field to make me give up faster. In essence, Kale turned back to the line. He cracked something into the pan that was not an egg but functioned like one. The smell of it was nothing like the inner systems. It was exactly like here. Tell them, he said they can try. Oral smiled. He reached into his coat and produced the flask and set it on the counter between them. Velnathi tea, he said. I got more. Kale poured it. It tasted like mineral water from somewhere with a different water chemistry, and a little like iron, and a little like the residue of 3 years on a station at the edge of the expanse, and something else he didn't have a word for yet. He drank it and went back to work.